Aloha. Okay, let's try that again. Aloha. Maikai. Aloha, I'm Doug Herman, Senior Geographer here at the Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indian. I'm very, very pleased to have you all today here, and particularly pleased to have my friend and colleague Chad Kālepa Baybayan. Chad is fluent in the Hawaiian language and is captain and navigator of the Hawaiian deep-sea voyaging canoes Hoku Le'a, Hawaii Loa, and Hoku Alakai. Kālepa has been active participant in the Polynesian voyaging renaissance since 1975 and has sailed on all major voyages of the Hoku Le'a throughout the South Pacific and the Pacific Rim. How many of you all are familiar with the Hoku Le'a? Okay, well, those of you who aren't, then you will be by the end of this talk. Kālepa was past site director of Honua Kai, the Exploration Sciences Division of the Aha Punana Leo Hawaiian Language Immersion School, which teaches Hawaiian language to participants, the crew aboard the Hoku Alakai. He currently serves as the navigator in residence at Imiloa Astronomical Observatory in Hilo, Hawaii, developing wayfinding activities and curricular materials. And he's been doing demonstrations, more 3D kind demonstrations before and after this program, so there'll be another one coming up a little bit later today. Consult your program. In 2007, Kālepa and 4 other Hawaiian men were initiated into the Order of Po, the 2,000-year-old Society of Deep-Sea Navigators. They were initiated by their teacher, Master Navigator Pius Mau Piailug from the island of Satawal. I had the great pleasure of interviewing Kālepa a couple of times, and I wanted to share just one little thing that he said to me at one point. He said, regarding that Po ceremony, I've always assumed that the entry into that order of navigators, there would be a test to evaluate your skills. I was real fearful about the idea of being tested publicly in that arena. But we had one person aboard the canoe who was familiar with the Po ceremony, and he was there to help us prepare. I remember his first words of describing what Po is. He said, "The role of the Po is to be a light in his community, and that it's about stewarding the culture and the preservation of the art." So the ultimate goal of this ceremony was to publicly get you to commit to taking care of your community, because the navigators were and are the lifeline for Pacific Islanders. Please welcome Kālepa Baybayan.
Mahalo. Well, this is quite a setting. Hey, if you guys get bored, you can get up and leave. But if you don't want to, you miss out on a pretty good story. Aloha. You know, the word aloha is very unique. It means, it means benevolence, it means generosity, it means love, and it means welcome, and it means farewell. So it means a lot of things. So I say aloha kako. Kako is an inclusive pronoun meaning you and I. So I'm included in the welcome. So aloha. You know, 200 years ago when Captain Cook happened upon the Hawaiian Islands, and he was greeted by the first Hawaiians, and he listened to the language. And he wrote in his logbook, "They speak the familiar language of Otahiti." How could an ocean so vast and so wide come to have been settled by the common people? And that created a debate that's been raging for the last 200 years, is how could Oceania be settled by a common people? So the settlement began some 50,000 years ago. There was 2 settlements into the Pacific. When there existed the Sunda and the Sahu plates, Sunda being Southeast Asia and Sahu being Australia, there were waterways that separated these 2 peninsulas of land. But the widest waterway was about 40 nautical miles. And quite frankly, all you needed to do was grab onto logs and float 40 miles. You can do that in 2 days if you just float it across. And the people could see ahead of themselves, so they could see land that lay ahead, right? So that happened in 50,000 years of last Pleistocene era. Then in about the Holocene period of the epoch of time, which happened about 10,000 years ago, the sea levels began to rise. And when the sea levels rise, it filled in and created large waterways. And these people really had no boat building or canoe seafaring technology was permanently landlocked. Then beginning some 5,000 years ago, a second wave of people began migrating into the Pacific. Now these people were farmers, they were traders, they carried this very dentate lapita pottery to keep their food in, and they left a trail of potsherds. And that's how we were able to establish where they came from. They came from island Taiwan. But the main difference between the second migration of 5,000 years ago and the first migration of 50,000 years ago is this second band of Oceanians possessed canoe technology. And really, canoe technology is the mechanism by which they were able to explore and settle the Pacific. 3,000 years ago, they end up in the islands of Fiji. Then by 2,000 years ago, well, about 3,000 years ago, they end up in Samoa, Fiji, and Tonga. And in Samoa, Fiji, and Tonga, they begin to establish all the traits that we know as Polynesia. Yeah. Then about 2,000 years ago, they push into central Polynesia, Tahiti, the Cook Islands, and the Marquesas. And then maybe only 1,000 years ago, they reach Hawaii, Rapa Nui in the southeast, and Easter Island in the southwest. We also know quite distinctly that they got as far as South America. And we know this because the Polynesian sweet potato comes from South America. They also transported a bottle gourd from Polynesia. And today in El Arno, on the Arauco Peninsula in Chile, they found Polynesian chicken bones. So this kind of archaeology is showing that clearly the Polynesians got as far east into the face of the prevailing trade winds as South America. So the trade winds blow from east to west. That would be from the South American continent across the Pacific. And really the question is, how could have canoes moving from west to east could have migrated in the face of prevailing trade winds? Now we know that every year the winds go into seasonal wind reversals, so they probably would have waited for the seasonal wind reversals, okay? Also, in El Nino cycles, yeah, the westerly winds set in and they blow for more prolonged periods of time. Now, so these people would have waited for these winds to shift around, got on those winds, and probably sailed as far east as they could. Now, if the winds came back to blow from east to west, they simply turn around and go back home and try again on another year. We understand through mythology the great story of Polynesian settlers. But really, what unique evidence is there for contact between the large archipelagos of Polynesia? Well, about 15 years ago, two researchers did a study of stone adzes. You know what a stone adze is? Okay. Stone adze is this kind of a tool, yeah? Okay. They did a study of a stone adze that was found on Napuka Atoll, but they did a study of 19 stone adzes found in the Tuamotu Archipelago. Now, the Tuamotu Archipelago are a belt of islands about 200 miles north of Tahiti. Now, these are atolls. Stone adzes are made out of basalt stone, so they knew if they could identify where the source of the rock came from, they knew that the basalt rock had to be imported into Tuamotu Archipelago. They used this type of study called plasma mass spectrometry, which can identify the source that the rock comes from back to its eruptive phase. Of the 19 stone adzes, there was a very small nondescript adze called C7727. And what they found was truly one of the most remarkable finds in the study of Polynesian prehistory. They found that this stone adze that was found in the Tuamotus had originated on the island of Koho'olawe, on the southern corner of Koho'olawe, at a lava flow, and that someone had taken this stone and transported it 4,300 kilometers south to the Tuamotu archipelago. This was conclusive evidence of contact, prehistoric contact between the archipelago of Hawaii and the archipelago of the South Pacific. Okay, so although there's been current evidence, but there's also been arguments against the theory of a west to east migration. Quite frankly, one of the most famous arguers for a east to west voyage was Kontiki, right? Thor Heyerdahl. Now, all Thor Heyerdahl proved was if you built a balsa raft and then you towed the balsa raft 100 miles out from South America, and then if you cut the tow, it would take you approximately 100 days to get to land. That's all he proved. He went against the face of current archaeological evidence. He went across the study of genetics, and he went against the grain of linguistics. Well, so in the void of information in the 1970s, three researchers decided in an experiment in archaeology where they would recreate an artifact. One of the three founders of the Polynesian Voyaging Society was Herb Kauai Nui Kane, a very famous artist in Hawaii. And what they proposed to do was reconstruct a voyaging canoe. Now, this voyaging canoe is design accurate, but not construction accurate, in that it is made out of modern materials, plywood and fiberglass. But it conforms to the shape and design of prehistoric voyaging canoes. They also wanted to figure out how these canoes could have been navigated without instruments. They looked all throughout Polynesia for a non-instrument navigator, and they couldn't find one. But in the islands of Micronesia, very little islands of Micronesia, they found a band of islanders who still practiced navigation without instruments. They went to this island called Sarawak, and there was 7 navigation families. And the navigation families are ordered in hierarchy. They went to each of the navigation families, and each of the navigators refused to come to Hawaii to help. The person that agreed to come to Hawaii to help was the lowest of the hierarchy of navigators. His name was Mau Piailag, and he became the progenitor of the modern-day wayfinding movement. Now, Mau, quite frankly, understood that there was a great exodus on his island. Young people were leaving for work on neighbor islands. And he, Mau, recognized that if he didn't start to transfer this knowledge to further generations, it would be lost. And he felt that he had to export this knowledge outside of his community. So he was ostracized for taking his art and exporting it. But nonetheless, he felt that was the only mechanism for him to preserve the wayfinding tradition. So in 1975, the canoe sailed to Tahiti, greeted by 50,000 Tahitians. The first time in 700 years that a Polynesian voyaging canoe had arrived, had made a epic journey such as was partaken in over 600 years ago. And although the experiment was, quite frankly, was a success in that they met all the mission of navigating a canoe without instruments and sailing a traditionally designed canoe, it was a failure socially. Quite frankly, the crew was divided up between Hawaiians who sailed the canoe and researchers who were Westerners who were hauling. And quite frankly, the two sides never got together. Quite frankly, the Westerners never shared the intent or the mission. And so these two entities emerged on the canoe, and they kind of hovered in opposing hemispheres. And about 3 days into the trip, things started to digress, and they started to get more and more isolated from each other. Before they got to Tahiti, there was a blowout on the canoe, and it ended up in fisticuffs. Mao was so disappointed in the actions of the crew. Quite frankly, he was supposed to navigate the canoe back to Hawaii without instruments. He said, he wrote a scathing letter condemning the project. He told the organizer of the voyage to not come and look for me because I'm going to go back to my islands and you will never find me. And he left the project. Okay? He left the project, and the canoe had to sail back to Hawaii totally with the use of instruments. Now, on board the canoe was this energetic, very smart young Hawaiian by the name of Nainoa Thompson. And Nainoa Thompson really wanted to learn about navigation, but he was denied that opportunity because Mao left. But nonetheless, he began to re-engineer the art of non-instrument navigation. Yeah? He started to go back to academics because that was the only source that he could go to. And he began to study sciences like oceanography, meteorology, which is essential understanding of weather systems to voyaging and sailing by the wind, and astronomy. And he began to develop this very sound system, although quite speculative. He started to re-engineer the art of non-instrument navigation. So in 1978, he proposed to return to Tahiti. And so they re-recruited a crew, and on board the crew was this young Hawaiian who had tried out. He was, at the time, the best big wave surfer in Hawaii. Now, I'm not sure if you know his name, but I was invited to the recruitment process, and when I walked into the room, I noticed that they were recruiting the very most popular watermen in the state. And I was very young. I was 19 years old. I was very shy. So I immediately, after the meeting, walked into the elevator to kind of get out of the room real quickly. And as the elevator doors was about to close, this gentleman stepped into the elevator with me, and he turned around with me, and I always share this story because I can still hear his voice in my head. He said, hey, brother, we're going to be trying out for this thing together. More better we start out by being friends. More better we start out by being friends. My name is Eddie Aikau. And Eddie Aikau, in the 70s, was the premier big wave rider. He was the top of the game. He was surfing 30-foot waves in Waimea. Well, 30-foot waves back then would be considered 50-foot waves today. Yeah. Eddie Aikau, at that time, they were just began appointing lifeguards on Oahu. There was 2 lifeguards. There was Eddie and some other guy. But Eddie had rover ability on the North Shore. So Eddie would have a scanner, and whenever somebody would call the Haleiwa fire department to come and rescue, Eddie would rush off to the beach already, and he would rescue people. He averaged 360 saves a year. So he's pulling people out of the water almost every day. You know, Eddie Aikau, no matter how big the surf was, no matter how big the surf was, every Sunday he would go to church with his parents before he went to surf. There was a lot of drugs that was going on in the North Shore, but Eddie was clean. He was immaculate because he told me, and he liked to drink, and he used to drink his father's swipe. The father used to make this pineapple brew. But in one of his drunken stupors, he told me, you ever surf on 30-foot wave? I said, of course not. He said, you know what it takes when the wave comes crashing on your head and the water is pushing you down? It takes all your strength in your body and your spirit and your mind to survive that. And Eddie had such a great passion for surfing that he could just cut out all the bad things from life and just focus on the good things. Yeah. Well, in 1978, March 16, 1978, Hokulea began its second voyage back to Tahiti. I was not on the crew. I was an alternate. But they left at around 6:30 at night. By about 11 that night, they had loaded all the gear on the back of the canoe, so the stern of the canoe was low in the water and the bow was high. Yeah? And what happens is, when you take a wave, right, on the stern, and the hatch covers that seal the floor, well, one of the hatch covers came loose on the back. So the water started to fill the stern of the canoe. And if you don't catch it right then and there, then it's only going to progressively get worse. Every other wave that kept coming on board kept on lowering and lowering the canoe. And within a half an hour, the canoe had filled up with water on one side of the hull, and within 30 minutes, it had righted itself and it flipped completely over. Yeah. The crew hung on for throughout the night. 11:30, sun came up. They saw some planes. They shot some flares. They saw a ship go by, and by about 12 noon, it was clear that it was floating farther and farther away from the islands. So Eddie, being a lifeguard, asked the captain if he could go for help. And the captain gave his permission. Now night had come on again, and it was getting very, very bleak. And if you know the Hawaiian Islands, the big island is the easternmost island, and Oahu is in the central islands. Okay, so the last plane from Kona on the leeward side, is getting ready to depart Kona and fly to Honolulu. And the captain of the airplane says he had called for clearance, but for some reason the tower did not get back to him, so they had to re-vector further south. And he said, if you sit in the cockpit of the airplane, the windows are at an angle. So if he had flown the same route, he would have never saw the canoe. But because he had vectored further south, he was able to see the flare of the canoe. And it was the last plane. And was the last opportunity for them to have been sighted. And the pilot of the plane said that the canoe had drifted into the flight path for planes that vector between Hawaii and Tahiti only, and that flight is only once a week. So they were rescued, but Eddie wasn't found. So the society was at its most tragic, lowest point. The Polynesian Voyaging Society, they had a really bad beginning in 1976 with the fisticuffs and the fighting. In 1978, they swamped the canoe, and we lose Eddie Aikau. So a lot of people were clamoring for the Polynesian Voyaging Society to shut down. But one person stepped forward to lead us out of this darkness, and his name was Pinky Thompson. He was Nainoa Thompson's father. Now, Pinky Thompson has a great role in Hawaiian history. He was a social worker. Pinky Thompson during World War II, when the war broke out, had enlisted. He tried to enlist in Hawaii, but because he was too young, he couldn't get in. So he went to the West Coast, and he enlisted, and he got in. He snuck in. But he snuck in as a Native American. And what do they do to Native Americans? What do they make them? Code talkers and scouts. Exactly. So he got put in as a scout. And on D-Day, as he was leading his battalion back, he was shot through his eye. And then he was transported back to they said they transported him back to a medical treatment area, and there was two piles of wounded, one for the treatable and one for the untreatable. And they put him on the untreatable pile. And his friends refused to put him on untreatable. So 4 of his friends took him back to the beachhead to transport him back to the hospital ship. And in that process of transporting him back, one of his comrades stepped on a landmine and was killed. But Pinky was blind for a year. He was recuperating on the East Coast. And he said in the darkness of his blindness, it was more crystal clear that his mission in life was to help the social well-being of his people. So Pinky Thompson was really a social worker, but he was the leader that emerged to move the Polynesian Voyaging Society out of its darkness. And he told Nainoa, you go get your best friends together, the people that support you the most, and we're going to rebuild the voyaging organization. So we did that. We started to rebuild the canoe. We started to trained rigorously, and we came up with a safety plan. And that safety plan called for a second canoe or our escort vessel. So whenever we sail, whenever the canoe sails, it always has an escort vessel, and that's for safety purposes. Now, we get criticized because we have an escort vessel, but we're not suicidal, yeah? We're not suicidal. And then Nainoa started to refine his navigation. The first thing he did was he began working with the planetarium operator at the Bishop Museum. His name was Will Kaselka, and this really was a bridge between culture, wayfinding art, and astronomy and science, and they had a very, very nurturing conversation, and Nainoa would go in with questions about astronomy, and Will Kaselka, who was a planetarium operator, would never give him an answer to his question. He'd always say, let's go explore the answer together. And sometimes you just get crazily wild with Will and say, just give me the answer already. But no, let's go explore the answer. So there was this one friendship on one side between Will and Nainoa, culture and science. But the one thing that was lacking, was the cultural component. Nainoa had amassed a vast knowledge because he had studied astronomy, meteorology, oceanography, so he had all the sciences down. But one thing he didn't have was the discipline of the ocean. And he could only get the discipline of the ocean from a traditional navigator. And Pinky told Nainoa, you need to go and get your teacher back. So Nainoa got on a plane, flew to Saipan, looked for Mao, found Mao on the beach, and apologized for the behavior of the crew in 1976. And he begged Mao to come back to Hawaii to train him so that Nainoa could bridge two sides. So he could understand the disciplines of what it took to be a navigator, and Mao agreed. And ever since that year, back in 1979, we have navigated Hokulea successfully all over the Pacific Ocean. In 1980, we went back to Tahiti. Nainoa navigated the canoe for the very first time. I was on board the crew. I was on board the crew from Hawaii to Tahiti. I was just a regular crew member, but I got very interested in what Nainoa was doing. And before the canoe arrived in Tahiti, Nainoa realized that in order for him to perpetuate what he was doing, that he needed to teach. It was a very informal relationship. He said, hey, look, if you're interested in learning about navigation, I invite you to stay on board the canoe back from Tahiti to Hawaii. And ever since 1980, it's been that kind of a relationship. So, so that's when I began being initiated into the practice of non-instrument navigation, which evolved to become wayfinding. And wayfinding is the more appropriate term that we use today. In 1985, we wanted to keep on exploring. This time we decided the most legendized of all voyages are the trip to Aotearoa. You know, in the mythology of the Maori, they take the discovery of the islands back to 7 canoes. And the 7 tribes of New Zealand, the names of the tribes are the names of the canoes that they arrived on. So this is a picture of a canoe, and this is the canoe that came out to greet us. 110-foot single log canoe, 88 paddlers on board. Natoki mata whārua. We wanted to keep on learning. Like I said, Hokulea is a design-accurate canoe. It's not a construction-accurate canoe. So we went back to our forest, and this time we decided to build a core log canoe. But we looked long and hard in the forest, and we couldn't find a log. And then it became this is a great question. Well, if we find the last big core log in the forest, would it be practical for us to cut it down and build a canoe? So we had a real enigma, yeah. But we knew from mythology in Captain Vancouver's logbook that on a voyage between Kauai and Oahu, he came across this single-hull canoe. It was golden in color, and he knew that the log didn't come from Hawaii. And so they were becalmed in the channel, and so they sailed up alongside this canoe and asked, where did this canoe come from? And the Hawaiians replied, it was a gift from the gods, and it floated on the sea. So we understood that Hawaiians used driftwood logs from the Pacific Northwest. So we we approached the Sea Alaska Corporation. We asked them if they would sell us logs. We explained what our mission was. Sea Alaska Corporation is a native-owned organization. And they said, no, we donate you the logs. We donate you the logs. We will even pay to ship the logs to Hawaii. You just have to make use of every single piece of the log. And from that log, we produced the hulls of Hawaii Loa, which is the second voyaging canoe in Hawaii. And in 1995, I navigated this canoe along with my co-navigator, Bruce Blankenfield, and we navigated this canoe successfully from Hawaii to the Tuamotus and then on to Tahiti. So we can talk a little bit about navigation. Navigation works this way. You only know where you are in the ocean by memorizing each and every second where you've gone. So let me do a demonstration. Second where the canoe's gone. Yeah. It's a process of dead reckoning. Dead reckoning is speed versus time and direction. If you have a break in that lapse in that cycle, if you for some reason get disoriented, then you're lost. There's nothing in the sky that's going to get you back on track. You have to always know where you are. So in the morning, this is Nainoa, and he's looking off at the sun, the rising sun. The sun is our daytime star. Okay? He takes a bearing on the sun. Then, where the sun rises, he looks for the long swells. Okay? He lines the ocean swells up with the sun. That's the second clue. Then he feels where the wind is coming from. And he memorizes the sensation of the wind against his body. Yeah? And then there's a certain rhythm the canoe makes as it climbs up and down the swells. So he internalizes the rhythm. Yeah? So if the rhythm changes during the day, then something's gone off course. Either you steered the canoe off course, or the conditions have changed. Now, the conditions are not going to change very rapidly. So normally it means that you've steered the canoe off course, then you take the canoe, you bring it back on course to where the rhythm feels the same. Okay? So we estimate our position based upon sunrise and sunset. So from sunrise to sunset, if we've gone 5 miles an hour, we've done that for 12 hours, then we've gone 60 nautical miles. Sunset comes on, sun is setting, we take our estimate, and then it brings on a night sky. And as long as you have a clear night sky, as long as you can see a few stars, that's like many suns, right, during the day. So we basically sail from Hawaii to Tahiti. We've done that about 6 times, I believe. That's basically a north-south track. That's very unique in the Oceania migration myth because they sailed from west to east. We sail north to south. We sail across the winds, with the winds blow from east to west. The stars all rise from east to west. The swells move from east to west. So you're just sailing under the rising of the star field and the wind blowing across the hull to Tahiti. You turn around the canoe and you sail back the other way. It's as easy as that, but it can be a lot more complicated. Trust me. You cannot tell longitude just by stars alone. You need instruments. You need a chronometer. We have systems of dead reckoning to figure out longitude, but between Hawaii and Tahiti, we don't need to figure out longitude. However, we do need to figure out latitude, and we do latitude measurements by measuring the altitude of stars as they cross the meridian, which is the line that you take between the North and South Pole. It's the highest part of the sky, and we calibrate our hands very accurately. The latitude for Hawaii is 21 degrees. That's kind of right in the nook of his finger. Yeah, you see that? And he just puts the Polaris right there. And so once he puts Polaris right there, we employ a system that's called upwind sailing. In other words, you always want to be upwind of your target. Yeah, always want to be to windward of your target. Once you establish latitude, right, then you simply turn your canoe, put the wind behind you, and the wind blows from east to west, and the wind will blow you to land. Now, that's the theory. That's the theory. But the theory has worked out every single time we've sailed. Every single time. Yeah. Okay, so, but for finding the low islands of the Tuamotus, the altitude of stars will tell you when you're getting close to land. But really what leads you into land, first you look for the seaweed, and secondly, you look for the birds. These white birds are the first precursors to land, usually about 72 hours out. And then there's another turn, which is black. When you see the black noddy, you're about 24 hours from land. We always run into these clues. Always leads us to land. So real quickly, life on board the canoe. Crew members, if there's a dozen or so crew members, we're divided up into watches. We stand watches 4 hours during the day, 4 hours at night. You don't have a wristwatch on to tell time, so you use the movement of the body of stars to tell 4-hour increments of time. Crew members ask me if I really know what time it is, and I say to them, well, where are you going to go? You have a hot date tonight? Something like so you're pretty much stuck on board the canoe, so don't worry about accurate time. We fish along the way, and ahi like this feed the crew for a number of days. We don't have refrigeration on board, so we cut the fish up and dry it on racks, or we eat it raw, or we cook it. Raw fish, no beer. A voyage we did was to Rapa Nui. Rapa Nui was the hardest problem that we needed to crack, and we had taken until 1999 to decide to go find Rapa Nui, because Rapa Nui sits way off by itself in the corner of the southeastern Polynesian triangle. They introduced the hawk to that island, so the hawk killed off all the seabirds. So it's going to be a real problem for us. We divided the trip up into legs. The first leg was from Hawaii to the Marquesas. I flew my crew down to the Marquesas Islands, and I was going to take the canoe from the Marquesas to Mangareva. I decided to make the trip very interesting by targeting this one island, this one lonesome rock of an island, Pitcairn. Pitcairn's got 42 people, all with the last name Christian. Yeah, so I got on the island, and they have this plan. They gather the crew up, and then they take you to their homes. They divide the crew up, and they basically sell wares. That's how they make their money. But I was down there, and I was asking, well, what's the last name of this family? And they said, Christian. And I said, what's your last name? And they said, Christian. They said, oh, so you guys are related? And they said, no. I was just totally confused. So I asked, what about the last name of this family? Oh, the last name is Christian. So you're related to them? They said, no. And I couldn't figure out why. And then I asked them, and they said, they're so far removed from the original settler, Fletcher Christian, that they no longer see themselves as being related. And this is Mangareva, and we're sailing up to Mangareva, which is the second stop on our sail to Rapa Nui. But I show this shot with the moon overhead because when I approach new landfalls, I always like to have it illuminated at night. So I figure out when it's going to be full moon at my destination, then I estimate how many days it's going to take me to get there, and that's when I leave. So I'm just arriving at full moon. And this is the crew of 13 that sailed to Rapa Nui. It was only the senior-most members of the Polynesian Voyaging Society. It was not a very fun trip because it was such a small target. The crew was very, very disciplined. Nobody made a joke the whole 19 days that we were on the sea. But we estimated that it would take us 40 days to get to land. We made it there in 19, less than half. Because Naino had done immaculate work in the study of meteorology, and he had picked a season when the winds would go into one of those reversal cycles. And so we got there ahead of the welcoming party from Hawaii. So this is the day that we arrived in land. So we thought we were about 72 hours away from the island. And then we began our tacking maneuvers. We figured 3 days of tacking maneuvers. So we would tack from sunrise to sunset, sunset to sunrise. we would tack back the other way in zigzagging patterns. So on the first evening of the first tack, 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. in the morning, we saw the black shadow of the island. Now, someone had called Nainoa up to identify the island, and Nainoa couldn't believe that we had found the island. But we had. This is Rapa Nui. This is me greeting the first Rapa Nui. Rapa Nui, of course, is known for its stone moai, the stone statues. The story of these stone statues is they have ahupua, or districts, on their island, and every district has a paipai, which is that platform, and they have moai that they stand up. And they say the moai are the living embodiment of the ancestors. See, because behind every paipai platform, they all have the same thing. They all have crematoriums. They all have canoe landings. And the crematorium, so when somebody from their district would die, they would take the bodies there, they would burn the flesh off the bones, then they would wrap the bones in cloth, and they would stick the bones into the paipai. And that's why they say that the moai are the living embodiment of the ancestors. But that society broke down, they toppled down all the moai, and it was replaced by the orongo cult. Orongo is the bird call, and every year they would have a competition. And the competition is you climb down this cliff when the orongo sounds, or the bird call, and then you would swim to that island out there, and you'd wait for the first egg to be laid. And whoever got the first egg swam that first egg back unbroken and presented it to the chief, became the bird man. And the bird man got to control all the resources of the island for 1 year. His ahupua, or his district, got to control all the food resources. As Doug had alluded to, in 2007, we were initiated into the Order of Po. That is Maupiailag. He was the last Po inductee, which happened right after the war. Then after the war, they shut the practice down because of the black magic that was connotated with the art of Po. Anyway, he went to his chief, and he asked his chief if he could initiate 5 Hawaiians, never before from outside the society. He also initiated 11 Satawalis. So there were 16 of us. And again, it's a 2,000-year-old tradition. And all the tradition is about is getting you to publicly commit to stewarding your culture. Because on his island, the navigators, they provide the source for food. Their role is to navigate out beyond the horizon to these small atolls or these low-lying reefs, and to fish and to bring the fish back to their island. So their islanders are tied to the navigators. Yeah. So right after the war, he was initiated, and then again in 2007. He died about 2 years ago. But what he wanted to do was ensure that the tradition of the navigators survived, and he was able to accomplish that with his life. And remember I said that he was ostracized in his society for exporting the knowledge? Well, that reversed itself. And he was greatly revered on his island for what he did, for sharing the tradition, the wayfinding tradition of the navigator. I want to talk about, real quickly then, about a real ambitious plan that we have to sail the voyaging canoe Hokulea around the world, beginning this year with a sail around the state of Hawaii and be sailing to the South Pacific beginning in April. It will visit 64 countries, visit 100 ports, encumber about 300 crew members. It will involve 2 voyaging canoes, the Hokulea and the Hikianalia. Hokulea, of course, being launched back in 1975, and the Hikianalia was just launched this past summer, and it's a modern-day voyaging yacht. It's got completely carbonless footprint. It's got electric motors on board that powers the canoe, complete with solar panels for all electricity. And the whole mission is about raising awareness about the condition of the Earth's oceans. The Earth's oceans takes up 2/3 of the globe's space. And the Earth's oceans are the incubator for oxygen on our planet. So everybody take a deep breath. Now you take half that breath. In 50 years from now, if we don't take care of the oceans, that's what's going to happen. Yeah. It's going to be as extreme as maybe 50%, maybe 70% of that breath that you took. Yeah. That's what's going to happen if we don't address the condition of the Earth's ocean. The biggest worry we have for this voyage, well, there's two big worries. One is the hurricane season, and the hurricane season always happens in the hemisphere, whatever hemisphere you're traveling in the summer. So as long as we sail in the winter season, we'll be okay. So that's one thing. And the second thing, what do you think the second thing is about sailing around the world? What is the second danger? Pirates. Pirates. This is the occurrences of piracy. Yeah. You can see up here in the Saudi Arabian Sea, the west coast of Africa, there's few occurrences of piracy. But look at the Arabian Ocean. Yeah. So we're going to take a route that avoids piracy. And that route's going to take us around South Africa as opposed through, the Suez Canal. Yeah. So I'm just going to show you this quick video.
In mid-2013, the Polynesian Voyaging Society and the voyaging canoe Hokulea will embark on a journey around the world. A 46,000-mile, 36-month voyage to 21 countries with 65 currently planned landfalls. We sail for peace, for the love of our planet, and with the desire to leave the children of the world a hopeful, healthy future. To understand Hokulea is to go back in time, to the origin of Polynesia itself.
Goes back 7,000 years ago, where the first really oceanic people came out of China, and it came out of Taiwan. 1,000 years after that, spreading through the Pacific Islands in Melanesia, even in Indonesia. Then you get to Polynesia, this oceanic country bounded by Hawaii in the north and New Zealand in the southwest, and Rapa Nui in the east. 10 million square miles, 600 times more water than this land, biggest country on earth, bigger than Russia. And it was discovered by these extraordinary people. And I say extraordinary because you could argue that they were really the astronauts of our ancestors. They were the greatest explorers on the face of the earth.
Today, as we struggle with the depletion of natural resources, the degradation of our land, heavens, and oceans, and conflicts that result from overconsumption, we believe that ancient wisdom can and will inspire contemporary solutions. Since her launching in 1975, Hokulea has sailed 135,000 nautical miles throughout Polynesia to Micronesia, Japan, and the west coast of the continental United States. What began as an effort to disprove critics who doubted Polynesians' ability to sail purposefully, unaided by navigational instruments, has grown into a cultural reawakening, a living commitment to sustainability, and a movement to bring experiential, value-based, community-grounded education to the forefront.
As the Hawaiian culture is re-emerging, rediscovering, re-strengthening, that's not a common story around the world. That is a story that is unique. There are cultures and languages that have been lost every single day across this planet. This voyage intensely is supposed to honor, it's supposed to celebrate, and it's supposed to strengthen all cultures on the planet by respecting them.
Lehua Kamalu is one of the Polynesian Voyaging Society's emerging young navigators.
We wouldn't be here today if our ancestors didn't figure out how to live in balance with their environment and with these islands. There is a lesson in going back to traditional practices and finding some way of bridging the gap between what is modern and ancient and making life livable and healthy and safe.
Which one of these two?
Ka'iu Lani Murphy has been sailing on Hokulea since 1997 and is one of very few crew members who will sail the entire worldwide voyage.
This is a critical time for us. A lot of people are realizing that because of things that we've done to the planet, to our oceans, the land in the past, that just affects our ability to have oxygen to breathe. And so it's not limited to somebody in Hawaii. It affects everybody that breathes. Along with building better relationships with people around the world who have the same desire to take care of our planet, you know, we're part of a movement to have leaders, peace leaders, really, with the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Desmond Tutu, to recognize that there is something special about Hokulea, special to us, and I think it does bring that kind of worldwide attention that we are on the right path and we are something that can carry that message of peace around the world.
Investment is not an investment for a monetary reward at the end. You're not going to cash in on this and say, all right, now I have this much money. It's an investment in the earth. It's an investment in the future. It's an investment in keeping traditions and resources and knowledge and learning alive for the future generations.
If you come from the lens of what the canoe is supposed to do, it will do nothing if we're tied to the dock. We're not going to change the world, but we're going to go and build a network of people around the earth who are going to change it. And our job is to help them be successful.
So you can follow the voyage on hokulea.org. And now I'd just like to wrap up. In the words of our most famous of all crew members, the late Lacey Veach, who was an astronaut for NASA, who flew on several missions on the space shuttle. One day he was sleeping, and the captain woke him up and kind of floated in front of this window. And see that's a stone adze that's floating in the cockpit of the space shuttle. You're supposed to manifest everything that goes on the space shuttle. You won't find this adze that's manifested in the log. But he really emerged for him that the idea of vision. The enormous changes that our islands face in the 21st century, we must form a collective vision of what we want our future to look like and how we will reach that vision. The collective vision of the voyaging community today is that Hawaii and our world is a special island home. We will be a place where the land, sea, and people are cared for, and the communities are healthy and safe. And then looking back on Earth, he realized that in learning to care for the Earth and all living things, we learn how to care for our future. Achieving balance was one of the greatest accomplishments of the Hawaiian people, and recreating it for the future generations will be our greatest of all challenge. The Polynesian people who first traveled here, first traveled to Hawaii, voyaged the farthest, risked the most, and were rewarded with the greatest of all finds, Hawaii. For modern-day wayfinders about Hawaii's voyaging canoes, the voyage is much more than just discovering islands in the sea. It is more than a finding of land. It is a tribute to our ancestors' ingenuity and courage. It is a testament to their success in face of enormous adversity. It is about the universal quest for a better way of life. It is the best of what discovery and exploration can be, the marriage of will and knowledge and the spirit and flame of new hope. These canoes are driven by the beliefs of thousands of volunteers and the million man-hours they have given. The canoes remain a vehicle for great messages, a symbol for the survival of island Earth and humanity. We will not survive without discipline, self-respect, positive beliefs, and fearless vision. These are the traditional wisdoms of our ancestors, our teachers who guided those first canoes to our shores. Aboard the canoe, the sky is our constant companion. It guides us along our way. It bears witness to who we are and how we behave. The pulse of the stars and moon the rhythm of an undulating sea. He Lani Ko Luna, he Unua Ko Lalo, the sky above, the earth below. This is a wonderful place, and it belongs to all of us. Thank you very much.
Okay, we're going to take just a little bit of time for questions and answers. He's got microphones, and I'm going to pull some chairs out.
Any questions?
Yes.
Sure.
If the navigator was so important for the fishing net, why did the Menehune build the fish ponds on Kauai?
Because that way you didn't have to navigate out away from the shores. That way, on certain islands where the environment is right, it's best to harvest the fish and keep the fish close to shore. So you wouldn't have to go and navigate out away from islands. So fish ponds in particular, are the product of very large islands. The low-lying atolls, they don't have fish ponds. They don't have the shoreline capacity for it. So that's why the navigators are so important. Good question, though. Thank you. Yeah.
The local Polynesian sea environment is a known commodity. How do you navigate using ancient techniques outside of that milieu?
Oh, you mean outside of the tropics?
Yes.
That's a good question.
How do you go to the Cape of Good Hope?
Yeah, that's a question that we got to resolve, because all our navigation exists because the islands of the South Pacific and Hawaii are located within the tropic. Our system of navigation is tropic centric. So now we're going to have to modify our system. Okay, and I can tell you real quickly. In the southern hemisphere, in the northern hemisphere, you can identify the North Pole by the North Star. So as long as you can see the North Star, you're fine. But in the southern hemisphere, you don't have a pole star. But what you have is the sky rotating around a big black hole. You have to be able to identify that black hole. You have to be able to see that black hole. And that becomes the bearing. That black hole becomes the bearing. You have to imagine that black hole is the bearing that you're going to use to hold direction. And you're going to be sailing east to west. You're going to be sailing in the direction of the setting star field on your bow and the rising star field on your stern. I've kind of toyed with the idea of how do you set direction in the southern hemisphere with no pole star. But we have pointer stars. Any two star that passes through the meridian, so any two stars that rise east, move west, but pass through the meridian, which is the imaginary line from north to south, is a pointer star. So you can draw lines through those two stars and it'll point towards a celestial pole. We have a series of these stars already identified. So that's how we're going to resolve the issue of navigation in the southern hemisphere. And we're also going to use GPS. The canoe that's following us will be using GPS. The lead canoe will be using non-instrument navigation. Yeah.
So on land, with the compass, they call it orienteering. So basically, you're orienteering using the sky, the sun, and everything, the water, the tides, nature.
Yeah, basically that's it. Our compass is totally visual. Yeah, it's totally visual. Anything that you can see, you can use as a clue to help orienteer or orientate your canoe.
Other questions?
Yeah, we're taking very old high school students, like seniors. We're taking a lot of college students, and that's divided up with senior crew members. We're actively recruiting for it. There's going to be a number of educators on board the canoe, a number of researchers, environmental researchers. When we began recruiting around the islands, so there was a lot of people, but now that we're getting close to the time of execution, the pool is kind of tightening up because of all the commitments we have that we've engaged in. quite frankly, people that we told we need to take along the trip with us, especially the researchers. Yeah. Yeah.
Is this a career? I mean, can you live by doing this, or is this has to be supported?
It has to be supported. It has to be supported. Yeah, you can't make a living doing this unless you're me. Yeah. I'm the only one that has a job.
Kālepa, going back to this young lady's question here, what is it that Mao said to Nainoa them when he came over, and Nainoa them were like 20s, you were 19 or whatever,
Oh.
and they said, we want you to teach us how to navigate.
Well, one story what Mao said was they had always gone to the Lanai lookout. It's a special place on the eastern side of the island. It's pretty secluded. And they would always go there for watching the sunrise. And at sunrise, they would look at the different colors in the sky and predict weather. So Mao asked Nainoa this very perplexing question. He said, "Do you see Tahiti?" And Nainoa had to think twice about that question. Do I see Tahiti? Is he talking about, do I see it physically, or can I imagine it? He says, so Nainoa responded quite naturally. He said, "Mao, I cannot see Tahiti with my eyes. I see Tahiti with my mind." And Mao said, "Very good. Hold that thought, because if you don't hold that thought in your mind, you're lost." And that was the last lesson that Mao had shared with Nainoa. Yeah.
I was thinking about when, as I know the story, Nainoa said, we want you to teach us to navigate, and Nainoa being like 20 or whatever, in early 20s, and Mao said, "Oh, you're too old. Give me your children, I will teach them."
Yeah, we're too old, but we're the only ones that were ambitious enough to ask the questions. Yeah. Yeah, they have a lot of great weights, yeah. But we're on a canoe. The sharks are in the water. So
Hopefully it'll stay that way.
But quite frankly, it's to stay away from the pirates. The pirates are a lot more dangerous than the sharks. Trust me. It's the Southern Cross. It's the Southern Cross, and the Southern Cross rotates around the South Celestial Pole. Thank you. Thank you.
I believe we're out of time. Let's hear it again for Kālepa Baybayan.